Hello everyone, I am Lillymu 961 and today I am going to attempt to review Blood Promise, the fourth book in the Vampire Academy series by Richelle Mead. As I'm sure you already noticed, I said attempt, because approaching this monumental task requires me to backtrack a fair amount and actually discuss the events leading up to the end of Shadowkiss. So if you haven't read this third book in the series yet and want to avoid spoilers, I suggest you leave right about now. Near the end of Shadowkiss, a large group of Strigoi infiltrate the Academy campus. During the attack, Rose teams up with Christian after being forced to leave Dimitri on his own for a bit. With a stake and fire magic respectively, Rose and Christian take out a vast number of Strigoi together, but in the midst of the fray, Rose encounters a former Moroi turned Strigoi named Nathan, who vows to kill Lisa. Rose tries to take out this threat, but Nathan ultimately escapes into the night. In the aftermath of this attack against the campus, we find out that some Moroi and Dampers, including Eddie, were kidnapped by the Strigoi. Usually, this is considered a death sentence, but thanks to some help from Mason's ghost and Rose's unique ability to sense Strigoi via nausea, the Guardians decide to plan a rescue mission, which includes the controversial choice to bring along Moroi that use fire magic. For the first time in forever, Moroi and Dampers are going to fight together. A few hours before this rescue mission takes place, though, Dimitri and Rose discuss their future together since they're both hopelessly in love with each other at this point. The general plan is to keep things professional between them for the remainder of Rose's academy days, and then work out a way to have a full-on relationship while attending to their duties as Lisa's guardians. And you know whenever a scene like this happens in a book, somebody gonna die. So, as you can probably guess, things go wrong during the rescue mission. Most everyone escapes, but Dimitri is caught off guard at the very last second, and is presumably killed by Nathan, the Strigoi Rose just met a few chapters earlier. But no, the tragedy goes deeper than that. Once back at the academy, Rose briefly steps outside of the newly established wards to call Mason's ghost to her. She asks him if Dimitri is dead. He shakes his head no. She asks if he's still alive. He shakes his head no again. And in this awful moment, Rose falls to her knees and asks if Dimitri has become a Strigoi. This time, Mason nods. But again, the tragedy goes deeper than that. About a week later, on her 18th birthday, Rose slaps some paperwork on the headmaster's desk and formally drops out of school. She begins to make her way off campus grounds, but doesn't get far before Lisa catches up to her. She asks Rose why she never said anything about her relationship with Dimitri and begs her to stay. But as she's speaking, Rose reflects on a conversation that took place in one of the earlier books, in which she and Dimitri both stated that they would rather die than become a Strigoi. Remembering this, Rose resolves to find him and kill him. Lisa has already figured out Rose's intent concerning this, so she tries to talk her out of it. When this doesn't work, she attempts to use compulsion to make her stay, and it's in this moment that Rose's resentment finally comes out. It's not about you, okay? This time it's about me, not you. All my life, Lisa, all my life, it's been the same. They come first. I've lived my life for you. I've trained to be your shadow, but you know what? I want to come first. I need to take care of myself for once. I'm tired of looking out for everyone else and having to put aside what I want. Dimitri and I did that, and look what happened. He's gone. I will never hold him again. Now I owe it to him to do this. I'm sorry if it hurts you, but it's my choice. I'd shouted the words, not even pausing for breath, and I hoped my voice hadn't carried to the guardians on duty at the gate. Lisa was staring at me, shocked and hurt. Tears ran down her cheeks, and a part of me shriveled up at hurting the person I'd sworn to protect. You love him more than me, she said in a small voice, sounding very young. He needs me right now. I need you. He's gone, Rose. No, I said, but he will be soon. After a few more words, Rose walks away from Lisa and sets off on her path to kill the man she loves. The only clue she has is a final tip Mason gave her before moving on to the afterlife. Dimitri is somewhere in Siberia. When Blood Promise begins, Rose is already in Russia, staking out Moroi hangout spots as a means of finding any leads on where Dimitri's hometown is located, while periodically killing any Strigoi that happen to find her. This is where she meets Sydney and learns about the Alchemists. The Alchemists are a group of humans that work with Moroi and help keep the secrets of the vampire world secret. Sydney is definitely a central character in the first half of this story, along with a bunch of new characters including a mafia boss Moroi named Abe, members of Dimitri's family, a shadow-kissed couple, and a group of unpromised dampers who simply seek out Strigoi for the thrill of the hunt. Now at this point, I'm going to have to derail the progress of this review because I have some frustrations with the first half of Blood Promise. The best analogy I can give for the pacing of this first half is this idea that you are driving on a long stretch of road in the middle of nowhere, but you can see that your destination isn't too far off, so you drive a little faster. You're excited, you got your music blasting, you are anticipating the fun you're going to have once you finally reach where you're going, and then all of a sudden, the car stalls and breaks down on you. You're basically stuck there now. Probably in the blistering heat too, because you're just that unlucky. The first half of Blood Promise has over 200 pages of new character introductions, exposition, world building, and general setup in a situation where there was already a clear conflict at play. On top of that, the interesting parts of the setup keep getting interrupted by one Lisa Dragomir with a more elusive plotline involving her complaints about Queen Tatiana ordering her around, and an introduction to more new characters such as Avery, her brother Reed, her guardian Simon, and her dad, who has become the new headmaster of the school because the former headmaster stepped down for some inexplicable reason that probably has Queen Tatiana's name written all over it. I don't care about this right now, Richelle Mead. Come on. If I have one major complaint about Blood Promise, it's that the first half drags a lot. I mean, I thought Shadow Kiss was meandering a bit. No. I was so wrong about that. I take that back. I take it back because at least in Shadow Kiss, the momentum never flat out stopped. But here, it just stopped. And honestly, the slower pacing would have been perfectly fine if the truly compelling aspects of it weren't constantly interrupted by Rose checking in on Lisa every other chapter. One central plot wasn't good enough, apparently. No, we need two! This move by Richelle Mead was incredibly risky because by the end of Shadow Kiss, I personally was not all that invested in Lisa, and I don't expect many readers would be considering the whole Rose is in Russia for the sole purpose of finding and killing the man she's in love with because he's been turned into an undead monster. I mean, seriously, what more do you need for a compelling plot? It practically writes itself. Why would you add just so much Lisa drama that's unnecessary? Why? Why would you do this to me? Why would you do this to me? Why? On top of that, Richelle Mead, because yes, I'm talking to you now because I got things to say to you personally in this moment. There is legitimate intrigue surrounding the new characters that you set up for Rose to meet and interact with, especially in terms of the connection she builds with the Bellico family. And the connection she feels with them leads to indecisiveness on whether or not she should continue searching for Dimitri at all, and that builds up a fantastic conflict for her just emotionally, and it keeps getting interrupted. You bring in interesting characters such as Mark and Oksana, the Shadow Kiss couple, and they tell her that she should just stay with the Bellicos and make a new life for herself with them. And then you have Abe, who was presumably hired by someone to get Rose to go back to the States, and he's constantly trying to coerce her into leaving Russia once she makes it clear that she isn't going to tell him why she's there. And on some level, Rose wants to stay in Dimitri's hometown because she feels a sense of peace there, but deep down, she knows there's no real future for her within this town. And again, it keeps getting interrupted. It's not that I don't consider Lisa's side of the plot important. It is important. I don't think it's a waste of time or anything, but I just couldn't stand some of the interruptions that just kept happening, especially in some of the more emotional moments. For example, like right after Rose tells Dimitri's family that he has become a streetboy. Not too much longer after that, like, it gets interrupted by Lisa's drama again. And frankly, since I apparently have a vendetta against myself and didn't take notes again, the first half of this book is just a massive jumble in my head anyway, and I cannot stress enough that over 200 pages of this book is setup. I'm losing my mind. Okay, hold on. I need a second.
2 hours later.
Yeah, I can tell this is going to be one of those reviews. At any rate, there are over 200 pages of setup for what the main conflicts are going to be, even though we already had a beautiful major conflict to start with. And for a hot minute there, I was worried that Richelle Mead was going to drop the ball on me and I'd be forced to give a negative review. But this woman is an evil genius. The second half of this book had no right to slap me as hard as it did. And the only way I can explain and describe what the second half of this book made me feel is to go into K-pop mode for a minute, so just bear with me. To those of you who have been a viewer of this channel for a while, you will know that I am a huge fan of the K-pop group known as BTS. However, within their company, there is another group by the name of TXT. This group has always flown under the radar for me. Their debut song, Crown, was catchy and a fairly strong song for a debut, but in 2018, I was in full BTS hype mode, so TXT did not make a substantial impact on me in 2018 or 2019. In 2020, however, they came out with a song called Can't You See Me, which pretty much slapped me across the face. I consider it a musical reprimand for outright ignoring this group, but even though I was absolutely obsessed with this song throughout 2020, I still wasn't paying much attention to this group. Boy, was that a mistake. Fast forward to May 31st, 2021. This is 11 days after BTS releases Butter, a phenomenal upbeat track with clever and playful lyrics. I was in full BTS hype mode once again, but then this happened. TXT decided to release a needlessly epic title track and album that completely stole my heart and attention, to the point that it felt as if TXT's entire career up to this point was set up for the absolute brilliance that is this new album. And I'm shook about it because they had no right to come out of the woodwork like this on me. This is essentially what the second half of Blood Promise has done to my mind. It is executed so brilliantly that it makes the first half far more valuable than it would otherwise be. The drama of the second half just wouldn't work without all the setup from Rose and Lisa's perspectives. You need those 200 pages of setup to feel the full weight of the mental whiplash. And trust me, you want to feel the full weight of the mental whiplash. Don't act like you don't. That's what we're here for. We're not here for stable characters and rational decisions. We're here for the chaos. And Richelle Mead delivered just that. And so, for this review, I have no choice but to just unleash my inner fangirl considering the second half of this story. I don't have much more to say about the first half anyway. It's fine, but the second half completely overshadows it. I appreciate those 200 plus pages of additional world building and character introductions, and will reference stuff from the first half as needed, but the tea of the second half is just too good for me to put off talking about it any longer. There's going to be spoilers all over the place from here on. The spoiler-free version of the review is this. Richelle Mead took some big risks with this fourth novel, and by the end of the book, every last one of them pays off. The first half is ridiculously slow and has this annoying habit of forcing Lisa in wherever possible, but the second half is a masterpiece of incredible emotional drama that fuels one of the most intense action scenes in the series so far. And the ending, holy cow. Read this series, just read it. You'll see what I'm talking about. For the rest of you who have read this book or don't care about spoilers, it is time to spill the tea. Toward the end of the first half, Rose makes a deal with Abe to leave Baya on the condition that he stops Moroi from taking advantage of Dimitri's younger sister, Victoria. Victoria believes she and this Moroi guy are in love, but the truth is that this guy is responsible for getting her older sister Sonia pregnant. She doesn't know this, obviously, so Victoria throws insults at Rose, such as, "You act like you loved my brother, but there's no way you could have. No way you really understand love." This is hurtful for Rose, not only because it's not true, but because she had grown really close with Victoria while staying with the family. She was only looking out for Victoria and trying to prevent her from throwing her future away, and for a guy that made it obvious he just wanted the wham bam thank you ma'am. Not long after this confrontation, Rose joins up with a group of unpromised dampers led by a guy named Dennis. It's important to note that damper guardians all have promise marks on the back of their necks to indicate their dedication to protecting Moroi. An unpromised damper essentially means they're rogue. Soon after Rose joins, they all leave for Novosibirsk, a larger city in Siberia where Strigoi often hunt for victims. Rose quickly takes over the leadership role while working with these dampers, since she has the most Strigoi battle experience among them. She convinces the group to help her interrogate any Strigoi they find, and after one tough encounter, Rose manages to find a Strigoi that knows Dimitri. With her stake pressed against the Strigoi's neck, she makes her demands. "I've got a message for you to deliver to him. Tell him Rose Hathaway is looking for him." "I'm not an errand boy," he said, glowering. My stake slashed out, drawing blood, and he grimaced in pain. "You're anything I want you to be. Now go tell Dimitri what I told you. Rose Hathaway. Rose Hathaway is looking for him. Say it!" I pressed the point to his neck. "Say my name so I know you'll remember." Apparently Rose is Walter White now, but whatever. The Strigoi gets the message and he is released from the group's grasp. About a week after this, one of the members of the group has to work late, so Rose and Dennis end up going to her workplace to walk her back home just as night begins to fall. Rose notices an old homeless lady on the side of the road and veers off from her comrades to help. Distracted, she only gets a second to realize that a Strigoi is drawn near, but this time, it's not just any Strigoi. Oh no, it's Dimitri. This is the moment she's been waiting for. Her stake is ready, and Dimitri is slightly caught off guard by how fast Rose moves to attack. However, the eyes. Oh God, the eyes. Even with the sickening red ring around his pupils, his eyes still reminded me of the Dimitri I'd known. The look in his eyes, the soulless, malicious gleam, that was nothing like him. But there was just enough resemblance to steer my heart, to overwhelm my senses and feelings. My stake was ready. All I had to do was keep swinging to make the kill. I had momentum on my side, but I couldn't. I just needed a few more seconds to drink him in before I killed him. And that's when he spoke. Rosa. His voice had the same wonderful lowness, the same accent. It was all just colder. "You forgot my first lesson. Don't hesitate." This is the point in which the plot takes a dramatic turn. When Rose wakes up from being knocked out, she's essentially in a luxurious prison. She can't break the windows, she doesn't have her stake anymore, and basically has no way of getting out at all. Dimitri eventually enters this room where she's being held captive, and Rose springs into attack mode, trying everything she can to break past him. During all this, Dimitri makes no actual move to hurt her. After a few more minutes of struggle, she stops fighting him, and for a long time they simply stare at each other in silence. This is where we see the beginnings of Rose's true emotional struggle, separating the Dimitri she loved from the monster he's become. In many ways, Dimitri is similar to who he used to be. Despite everything Rose knows about Strigoi, Dimitri proves he's still capable of feeling affection and some sense of loyalty, however fleeting that might be. His main reason for returning to Russia was to get away from Rose so they wouldn't end up in this situation where he'd be forced to either change her into a Strigoi or kill her outright. Now's a good time to mention how Strigoi are made. The first method is for a Moroi to kill someone while feeding. This cuts them off from their elemental magic and they transform from a good vampire to a bad one. The second way for someone to become a Strigoi is if they are drained of their blood and then fed Strigoi blood immediately after. This is what happened to Dimitri. The strange thing about this whole situation is that while Dimitri wants to change Rose, he wants it to be her choice. So he's essentially bought her time to think about it in an estate belonging to Galina, a powerful Strigoi he works for. "I'm not supposed to like you anymore, Dimitri. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me?" I will probably always feel some level of confliction about Rose and Dimitri's relationship, especially now that he's a Strigoi and is using everything at his disposal to groom Rose into wanting to become a Strigoi. Because he's an undead monster now, he's manipulating her feelings for him in ways that are outright diabolical. I'm not going to go into too much detail on how he does this, but his tactics involve sucking her blood nearly every time he visits her. Vampire bites contain endorphins that make anyone who's bitten higher than a kite, and this prevents Rose from thinking clearly for the vast majority of her stay in this extravagant Strigoi prison he's brought her to. On some level though, I feel just as bad for Dimitri as I do for Rose because this isn't who he is. The Dimitri of old would have never stooped to these kinds of tactics. Plus, he was forced into Strigoi life against his will by Nathan. Even though he's happy about his awakening, as he likes to call it, he feels a great deal of anger primarily because it wasn't his choice. The fact he even wants to give Rose the opportunity to have a choice in the matter shows he still values her thoughts and feelings to some degree, but at the same time, he's purposely diluting her coherency and trying to lure her into becoming Strigoi by making out with her constantly and teasing her with the promise of sex after she's awakened. And because she's in love with him and they've already had sex one time before while he was still a damper, it makes everything that much more complicated. It hurts my heart. Rose loves Dimitri from the depths of her soul. She wants to be with him. So she's constantly facing this battle within herself about whether this new Dimitri is someone she could love or should love in the first place, given the whole undead monster thing. With endorphins constantly in her system, it's that much harder for her to resolve this issue because she feels such a profound happiness whenever he's around. This is also compounded by the fact that before she encountered Dimitri again, she was grieving him as if he were already dead. It's just a rough situation that she's dealing with here. So while she's essentially drugged out, only a small part of her maintains that she doesn't want to become a Strigoi, and this slowly creates tension between them. It's only after a confrontation with Nathan that results in Dimitri screaming at her that Rose starts to see what he's been doing to her and how she's allowed herself to be swallowed by the bliss of just being with him again. Even though her body is still craving the endorphins from the bites, she makes the decision to avoid this and pretend she's truly interested in becoming a Strigoi to throw Dimitri off her true intent to escape. On top of that, it's only a matter of time before Dimitri's boss demands that Rose be turned or killed. Through most of this, there has been no hint of anything going on with Lisa aside from Adrian popping into one of Rose's dreams once to warn her that something is off with Lisa. But at that point, Rose was still in her endorphin adult state, and she forced herself out of the dream without mentioning she was trapped in a Strigoi prison. However, not long after Rose starts regaining her senses, she jumps into Lisa's head, and Christian is breaking up with her. Wait, how did that happen? Okay, let's rewind this plot back a bit. Early on in the book, we meet a character named Avery. She and her brother follow their father to the academy after the former headmaster steps down. This was a move made by Queen Tatiana, so Lisa immediately has some misgivings about Avery. However, not long after, she overhears Avery having an intense argument with her dad. Once the argument ends, Avery spots Lisa and the two girls end up talking. Lisa feels bad about misjudging Avery before actually getting to know her, and the two of them form a fast friendship. Now, Miss Avery is rebellious in a way that's eerily similar to how Rose used to be. She's always suggesting she and Lisa do crazy things. On top of that, she has a crush on Adrian, which Rose feels some slight jealousy toward in the early part of the book, long before Dimitri kidnaps her. At any rate, Avery slowly starts to fill in the space Rose left behind. But as time passes, Lisa's behavior becomes more and more erratic, in part due to the effects of spirit, but there's something else going on that's amplifying her more negative emotions. At the same time that this is going on, Christian, who has been training Moroi on how to use their magic to fight, has taken Jill on as a new student. I told you Jill would be back. Anyway, fast forwarding a bit, Queen Tatiana calls Lisa to court for a weekend. Christian doesn't go because he doesn't want to deal with the politics of the court, so he asks Lisa to take Jill so she can get some magic training with Mia. Avery, her brother Reed, her guardian Simon, and Adrian also go on this trip to court with Lisa. While there, Lisa starts losing her mind. She acts out at a party, she gets drunk, she dances on a table, falls off a said table, but is saved from breaking her neck by an ex-boyfriend, who she kisses as thanks for saving her. Jill witnesses this and gets really upset about the fact that Lisa basically cheated on Christian. Avery and Adrian try to play it off since it's obvious Lisa is drunk out of her skull, but Jill is having none of it, and I am with you, girl. I'm with you on this. When she backtalks Avery, though, Reed suddenly shows up out of nowhere and is ready to attack the girl before Adrian steps in to save the day. And that's kind of odd. But anyway, once they all return to the school, Jill decides to tell Christian about what happened before Lisa can make up her mind whether she wants to tell him about the drunken kiss with her ex or not. Not so good there, Jill. That was Lisa and Christian's situation. They needed to settle that, not you, but anyway, not my business. A few days later, after Lisa gets in trouble for some random reckless thing she does that I don't care to remember, she catches up with Christian, and this is when the breakup happens. Rose is viewing this particular situation in the aftermath of realizing she needs to get out of this Strigoi prison and away from Dimitri, but during this scene, Lisa runs into Avery and Adrian. Within seconds, Avery senses Rose's presence in Lisa's mind and pushes her out, thus revealing she's been a spirit user all along. This does not bode well for Lisa, whose mental state is crumbling rapidly now that Christian has decided to walk out of her life in the same manner Rose did. She's in legitimate trouble, and Adrian is of no real help at the moment, partially because he's enraptured with Avery, but also because he and Rose just recently had a fight within her dreams. Rose has no way to contact anyone, and she has to come up with a plan to get out of her own dire situation before she can do anything for Lisa. This is where the tension finally starts to climb. There is a race against the clock on two fronts. The first is that Rose has roughly 24 hours to escape the Strigoi mansion before Dimitri is forced to change her, since he has determined that he will not kill her. The second is that Avery has been pulling the strings on Lisa's life since she arrived on the scene, and it's building up to something deadly. The two girls, though separated by time and distance, are virtually in the same situation. Their lives are currently subjects to manipulative forces, and breaking the chains binding their minds and hearts is the only way either of them are going to survive. Of course, Lisa's survival is entirely dependent on whether Rose can get out of this situation with Dimitri or not. Dimitri, due in part to becoming a Strigoi, is severely overconfident in this book. At one point, he even takes Rose outside to get some fresh air. Outside. Sure, her brain is still foggy from all the endorphins, but honey child, you're still showing her a path of escape. What are you doing? This is villainy 101. I should not have to explain this to you. Clearly becoming a Strigoi drained him of his brain cells. I guess Rose and Dimitri won't be the Bonnie and Clyde of intelligence after all. Also, while on the Bonnie and Clyde thing, just listen to this quote from the book. I had some serious problems here. It seemed like either way, I was destined to become a Strigoi. Dimitri wanted to turn me so that we could reign together as the vampiric equivalent of Bonnie and Clyde. That speaks for itself. I cannot tell you how satisfied I was reading that. I totally called that Bonnie and Clyde parallel in the last review. Ha ha! Anyway, the night before she makes her escape, Rose and Dimitri have one final conversation together. During this conversation, the subject of Dimitri's family comes up, and Rose feels this sense of confusion again. Dimitri is a Strigoi, but he talks about his family with a certain fondness that really shakes up Rose's perception of him in this Strigoi state. The nature of the conversation is completely different from any conversation they've had while she's been locked up there. He's gentler, and he almost resembles his old self. And Rose suspects that some of this may have to do with a spirit-charmed ring he's holding while they talk, which was given to her by Mark before she left Baya. Keep a note of that. That's going to be really important probably in future books. In any case, due to the sweet nature of this particular conversation, what happens the following day is absolutely gut-wrenching. Determined to escape, Rose manages to break the leg off of a chair Dimitri damaged in an earlier chapter, then uses it to forcefully demand the security codes of her doors from a human girl who desires to become a Strigoi. After getting the codes, she knocks this girl unconscious and hides her away mere moments before Dimitri arrives. Rose frantically distracts him with more questions about Strigoi, leading up to the most important question she has to ask. Tell me again, one more time, why do you want to awaken me so badly? A slightly weary look crossed his face. Because I want you. I've always wanted you. And that's when I knew. I finally realized the problem. He'd given that same answer over and over, and each time something about it had bothered me. I'd never been able to pinpoint it though. Now I could. He wanted me. Wanted me in the way people wanted possessions or collectibles. The Dimitri I'd known, the one I'd fallen for and slept with, that Dimitri would have said he wanted us to be together because he loved me. Rose kisses Dimitri one final time and then stabs him through the heart with the chair leg. Because he's a Strigoi, this won't kill him, but it will stun him long enough for Rose to begin her escape. And what an escape it is. This part of the book, where Rose is desperately trying to escape the Strigoi compound, is intense on a level that had me sweating. This huge, elaborate maze of a mansion is full of Strigoi and humans loyal to Strigoi. All of the odds are stacked up against Rose. First, she's facing this all by herself. Second, she's still weak from blood loss. And third, she doesn't have an efficient weapon to fight with because she had to leave the wooden chair leg in Dimitri's chest to keep him stunned for as long as possible. She is in a ridiculous amount of trouble here, but she manages to force a human to help her find the vault where they keep weapons and charmed items. Finding a more decorative stake to use, she makes her human hostage take her to a room that has a normal window for her to bust out of. But within this room is Dimitri's boss Galina, a fearsome Strigoi who has risen in the ranks and is extremely powerful. And at this point, Rose is running out of luck. Galina is simply too strong for her and is going to kill her when out of nowhere, Dimitri bounds around the corner snarling like a vicious animal and leaps for Galina rather than Rose. The fact that Dimitri still protects Rose after she literally just stabbed him, I don't care what anyone says, that is love right there. That is the truest of love. Because how are you going to still protect a person that just stabbed you? For real. This story's a mess. Also, on top of that, even when Rose has a clear path of escape, she ends up helping Dimitri kill Galina before booking it out of there while he's busy dealing with Nathan and some other Strigoi that show up. She jumps out a window, sprains her ankle, it's nighttime because of course it is, she gets stuck in a hedge maze on the premises, and against all possible odds, Dimitri overpowers the Strigoi that were attacking him and starts chasing Rose through the maze. On some level, while you're reading it, it feels like some horror level stuff, but speaking it to you right now, all I can think of is just Tom and Jerry. I'm losing my mind again, hold on. And while Dimitri is chasing her through this maze, he's all, I'm not sure we can both be alive at the same time. So now he's contemplating murder. Jumping out a window was the last straw, apparently. But it doesn't end there. The action of this entire chase sequence, it really did put me on edge while I was reading it. I know I'm laughing a lot, but it did legitimately put me on edge because the drama just kept building and building and building, and this poor girl just couldn't get away from this guy. They have multiple scuffles in the woods. Rose falls into a shallow river at one point and has to summon ghosts to even get away from Dimitri. And yes, the explanation for how Rose can do that is in the first half of the book, but we don't have time to cover that in this review because summoning these ghosts proves ineffectual anyway. Dimitri, this guy, he just keeps trucking along. Despite every distraction, despite every tactic that Rose uses, he just keeps going. This guy is determined. Trust me, I am well aware that this review is a complete mess. We're just gonna keep trucking along like Dimitri, okay? We're just gonna keep trucking along. Eventually, Rose makes it up to a bridge. Dimitri catches up not too long after, and at this point he reveals that it's actually still his plan to awaken her, to make her a Strigoi. Her choice in the matter flew out the window when she did. Rose responds to this by climbing onto the railing of this bridge, and Dimitri is stunned again, only emotionally this time because the girl is about to jump to her death in order to avoid turning. In no way, shape, or form does Rose want to die, but she's making herself accept that she might actually have to kill herself to end this nightmare. And goodness gracious, that's just so much drama. And Dimitri starts panicking, I start panicking, you guys who read this book start panicking, everybody's panicking. And he starts begging her not to jump. And once more, Rose is facing this horrible confusion again because the way he's pleading with her is in the way that the Dimitri of old would have pleaded with her had this situation occurred while he was still a damper. And it's just so much emotional turmoil just going on in this one scene. And what follows after this just broke my heart. In romantic literature, you will find a good deal of enemies to lover stories. Rose and Dimitri's story is not that. It is not that at all. This started out as a teacher-student relationship and evolved into a friendship where there was mutual attraction that eventually culminated in the two of them falling in love. In Blood Promise, these two have gone from lovers to enemies, and it is so heartbreaking to see this happen to them because their relationship prior to this fourth book was so incredibly powerful and beautiful. Dimitri is a creep in this book primarily because he's a literal undead monster now, but even in this state, there's still a part of him that actually loves Rose and wants what's best for her. It's true that he's selfish and manipulative, but it's really hard to hold it against him because his mind has been severely altered by the Strigoi transformation, which was forced on him. And as a Strigoi, it's a testament to the person Dimitri used to be that he even wanted to give Rose a choice in this matter at all. He could have just changed her immediately and not gone through all the hassle of locking her up. He waits a long while before really putting the pressure on Rose to make a choice, and even though he joked about killing her in the maze, when the two of them are standing on the bridge and he sees her climb over the railing, any thoughts concerning power and conquest disappear from his mind. Suddenly he's pleading with Rose, begging her not to jump to her death. And Rose is facing so much confusion and hurt because of all the time she spent with this new version of Dimitri. Even now, she still loves him so much, but she went to Russia to release him from this Strigoi curse in the only way she knows how. And here on the bridge, Rose has no other option but to bait him out and use his feelings for her against him. The chapters building to this brilliant scene on the bridge are fantastic, but the climax of this struggle between Rose and Dimitri, that one scene made this book for me. Just thinking about it, I get emotional just thinking about it. The way it's written is, it's perfect. It's way too good. Way too good. It hurt me so bad. The aftermath of this beautiful scene on the bridge has Rose cleaning up the mess involving Lisa and Avery, which is also a fairly good climax for the story because by that point I actually cared. Plus, like Rose, I needed a distraction from the grief that was tugging at my heartstrings. You had no right to do this to me, Richelle Mead. You had no right to make me feel so strongly about the bond between Rose and Dimitri and then rip it away. How dare you? All in all, I love the dynamic between Rose and Dimitri. Despite how awful he is in this book, and trust me, he's an absolute mess in this story, I love their scenes together, especially when the angst is amped up to the max. Anyway, I think now is a good time to share a few thoughts on some of the new characters that appear. First off, we have Sydney. This character will eventually earn her own spin-off series entitled Bloodlines, and for good reason. She's a no-nonsense, business-oriented person who doesn't like Rose at first simply because she's a damper, and alchemists consider anything vampiric as evil. However, over time, Sydney warms up to Rose and the two girls form a solid friendship. I definitely look forward to seeing more of Sydney in the future, but I have nothing more to say about her at this time. Abe Mazur is next, and there's not much I have to say about him either at this time. The inclusion of his character created a good amount of intrigue, and his interactions with Rose were definitely fun to read because Rose is constantly calling him an old man despite the mafia boss demeanor. He has a chilling presence, but there's a warmth to his interactions with Rose, especially towards the end of the story for reasons I shall not disclose here. While in Russia, Rose meets and forms a strong bond with the Belikov family. Dimitri's mother, Elena, is someone Rose admires a great deal and even sees as a surrogate mother figure before deciding she's happy with the mother she has regardless of her flaws. Another member of Dimitri's family she gets close to is Victoria. She's a very warm and bubbly character who instantly makes Rose feel welcome in the Belikov household, but as I explained earlier in this review, this ends badly due to a misunderstanding. A final character within this family that I'll mention is Dimitri's grandmother. This lady is a hoot, we love her, end of story. Next, we have Mark and Oksana. These two characters have the same shadow-kissed bond that Rose and Lisa have. Mark is stern at times when giving advice to Rose, but otherwise he's very likable. Oksana is definitely the quieter of the two, but she has a lot of power as a spirit user. Due to her unique skill set, she becomes a central force in the final conflict concerning Lisa and Avery. Speaking of Avery, oh dear, this girl. I will admit that it was fairly obvious she was going to be the villain of Lisa's story. At one point, I even remember thinking to myself, Avery is setting Lisa up for trouble. But due to my lack of care for Lisa's side of the story, my suspicions kind of went out the window midway through. And Avery, your evil plan against Lisa might have actually worked if you hadn't stupidly decided to let Rose in on the fact that you were a spirit user. This is villainy 101. What is wrong with you people? Just dumb. Reed and Simon are basically henchmen to Avery, so there's no use talking about either of them. Nathan is the Strigoi that turned Dimitri. During Rose's stay at the Strigoi mansion, he is a major antagonist and threatens Rose several times. If not for Dimitri's protection during these instances, this guy would have straight up killed the girl long before she even thought about escaping. His main issue is that he feels Dimitri doesn't give him the proper respect for awakening him. And why would he? You turned him against his will. Do you really expect gratitude after that? Why is everyone dumb in this book? Another character introduced is Ina, and she's basically just a servant girl to the Strigoi. She's in love with Nathan and wants to become a Strigoi. That's really all there is to her, and that's why she was promptly knocked out by one Rose Hathaway. Yeah, I think we're done talking about the new characters, but there are two other characters I need to discuss before we tie up this review. Before leaving the academy in Shadowkiss, Rose meets up with Adrien and convinces him to fund her quest to kill Dimitri. He obliges her on the condition that she agrees to give him a fair shot romantically once she returns. In this moment with Adrien, Rose isn't sure she will come back. The nature of her mission means there's a great potential for death. Fueled by grief and determination to bring peace to Dimitri's soul, Rose agrees to Adrien's conditions. During the course of Blood Promise, Adrien checks in on Rose through her dreams. He usually flirts with her in his usual theatrical fashion, but he also makes a habit of asking where it is she's run off to. Rose never gives him an answer. This frustrates Adrien primarily because he's seen what Rose's absence is doing to Lisa. Of course, he misses her as well. When Avery comes along and starts flirting with him, Rose, who is seeing these events through Lisa's eyes, feels small hints of jealousy. This is mainly due to personal insecurity over being replaced so soon after leaving the academy, but as the novel continues, Rose starts noticing Adrien's more positive traits. When he isn't putting on the playboy act, he's very chivalrous and kind. Though not particularly good at physical combat, Adrien has no problem standing up to people persecuting the weak. And in the final confrontation with Avery, Adrien rushes to Lisa's rescue. Rose notices these things and takes note of how handsome he is multiple times. By the end of Blood Promise, Rose has gained a new respect and admiration for Adrien. I sense that something will be brewing between these two fairly soon. The other character I want to talk about briefly is of course Lisa. She goes through a small arc within this story as well, since this is the most screen time she has had since the first book. During the course of the story, we see this girl hit rock bottom. Part of it is because of Avery's meddling, but it's also because Lisa slowly recognizes her own folly in regards to how she treated Rose at the end of Shadowkiss. At first, she can only feel resentment toward her best friend, but soon begins to feel guilty. This guilt fuels her recklessness and depression, especially after Christian breaks up with her. And while I wasn't all that invested in Lisa's half of the story, I feel that her downward spiral mirrors Rose's struggles with Dimitri in Russia. The two of them were forcing themselves to face everything alone when they should have been leaning on each other to get through these issues. One reason their friendship temporarily fizzled out was because Rose kept everything that was bothering her from Lisa. Another reason was because Lisa simply took Rose's friendship and protection for granted. She was so caught up in her need to learn new things about spirit that she ended up alienating Rose and Christian to a degree. But true friendships are forever, and it made me really happy to see Rose and Lisa reconcile by the end of the story. Christian is a different matter though, and I guess we'll see what happens with that in the next book. Speaking of the next book, yeah, I'm gonna reveal one key detail about the ending of Blood Promise now. Hopefully you guys took my spoiler warning at the beginning seriously, cause I'm about to spoil the ending right about now. So yeah, if you don't want it to be spoiled, you best be gone by now, cause you've had how long has this been recording now? Almost 45 minutes? You should have been gone. Near the end of Blood Promise, Rose returns to the academy, makes up with Lisa, and is allowed to re-enroll because Abe threatened to pull all his funding from the school if she wasn't allowed to finish her education. The reason he did this? He's her dad, apparently. But that little detail isn't important right now. Here's what is important. On top of making sure Rose was allowed back in school, Abe went out of his way to look into something odd that was said by a spirit user Mark and Oksana once knew. This particular spirit user is the half-brother of Victor Dashkov, who is currently rotting away in prison. The information in question concerns the idea that a spirit user can transform a Strigoi back into their original state, which Victor refuses to disclose any information on. Truth be told, Rose no longer cares about this because she killed Dimitri on the bridge. Yeah, about that. In the final chapter, Rose receives a package containing the decorative stake she presumably killed Dimitri with. It reads, "You forgot another lesson. Never turn your back until you know your enemy is dead." Looks like we'll have to go over the lesson again the next time I see you, which will be soon. Love, D. Rose can't get a break in this series. On a whole, I really enjoyed Blood Promise, but I would be lying if I said it didn't frustrate me at points. As stated before, Richelle Mead took some risks with this book, and while I personally feel that they pay off, not every person reading will. This story is a little over 500 pages long, and the first 200 pages grind the pacing to a halt, which wouldn't have been too much of a problem if the focus wasn't deviating into Lisa's perspective so often. Her sections, while effective in building a compelling conflict for the second half of the book, it's just really tough to get into. The second half more than makes up for these moments of irritation though. I'm absolute trash for Rose and Dimitri's dynamic, and this book delivers on the drama I was looking for. And thanks to this book's ending, the entire dynamic of the series has changed yet again. I don't know how Richelle Mead keeps doing this every single time. Objectively speaking, this book is probably the weakest of what I've read in the series so far, but it was still a riveting read, and the action scenes within this book are on another level. It was also a great deal of fun to see Rose in all these new environments throughout her time in Russia. Richelle Mead's writing is as atmospheric as ever, and once the tension starts building, it is impossible to get through this book without sweating or screaming out loud. The sheer emotional turmoil of the scene on the bridge is worth all of the frustration of the first half. It's so masterfully written and packs so much of a punch primarily because of all the buildup from the first half. This story just works. Does it have problems? Yeah, but it works, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I think at the end of the day, that's all I can really ask out of a book. And with that, I believe this review is done. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe too. You won't want to miss the next review. Things are going to get crazy. Best wishes, and God bless you all. Mwah!